Hello, I'm Terry Shirey, President and CEO of Nevada State Bank, and I'm joined today by Jeremy Aguero, Principal Analyst with Applied Analysis. Jeremy, great to see you.
Good to see you too, Terry. Glad to be here. We've got a lot to talk about.
It's interesting. This is the 8th year that you've conducted this survey on our behalf, and we saw over the years just this trend of increasing optimism, increasing results and performance by small businesses in Nevada as we were dealing with a growing economy. And then March of 2020 hit, and everybody's world changed. Everybody had to change their plans, adjust their strategies, and outlooks definitely changed. So how are small businesses feeling right now?
Look, if I'm going to use one adjective to talk about how small businesses are feeling, I think it's going to be pensive, right? From the standpoint I think, they're still feeling the effects of COVID-19, as I think we all are somewhat. And in some ways, I think there's a belief. Remember, this survey was conducted in January, right? Still a lot of things happening, still a lot of uncertainty in January. They recognize the difficult year that had been in the past. They're absolutely looking toward the future, but they're certainly more concerned about the direction of the nation's economy, right? Many more saying that the economy nationwide is not headed in the right direction. More than we've ever seen. Also, people saying Nevada's not necessarily headed in the right direction. And a lot of that has to do, of course, with COVID-19. But then if we switch over and we start to ask them questions about, do you expect the next 12 years to be better? Yes, I do. Do you expect revenues to go up? Yes, I do. Do you expect to see more stabilization, things to get kind of back to normal? Yes, I do. But they're still concerned, Terry. They're concerned about some of the things that didn't change during COVID-19. They're concerned about the ability to find and hire those quality employees. They're concerned about government regulation. They're concerned about where the economy goes post-COVID-19. And I think that cloud is sort of over everything that they're looking forward in the new year. I'm not going to suggest to you for a moment that small businesses are pessimistic. Even with everything that they've been through, nothing in the survey suggests that they feel like, Nevada is not going to recover, Las Vegas or Reno or even some of the rural areas aren't going to recover. As a matter of fact, they view exactly the opposite of that. They do expect a recovery, but it's their ability to get to the other side of that recovery that I think jumps out at me as much as anything else in this year's survey.
So, yeah, you brought up the concerns, and we've seen this very consistent theme: taxation, regulation, and healthcare being in the top three. I think every year that we've conducted the survey. This year, the economy jumped up in there. Not surprising, kind of a no-brainer, actually, when you look at what we all dealt with. But does that mean needs to be less focus in our state on taxation, regulation, healthcare? How do you think about that?
Look, one of the other main themes that jumped out at me in this year's survey was kind of a return to the fundamentals, right? What makes businesses work, right? Consumers being consumers, having an area where they can get things done, having cash flow management, all of those type of things, right? All of our businesses, they require consumers. That's why we're all in business today. And what I took away from the fact that, in the 6 years we've done it, the economy has never risen to number one, ever, in terms of the biggest concerns that people have. It's always something kind of specific, but here it is coming back to the most fundamental building blocks of what allows a small business to be a small business. And that is that the economy around them is functional. And what are they telling us when they say that? They're saying, look, we need to be allowed to be open for business, right? I mean, they've been operating under the shutdown orders, the closures, the reduced volume orders that have been out there. They've been concerned about the fact that consumers have been laid off, lost their jobs, may not have had as much income. They've been concerned about whether stimulus was going to flow in or not flow in. The fact of the matter is that fundamental element of the ecosystem that they're operating under is the thing that has them most concerned overall. Now, you brought up things like government regulation and things like that, and I think those two are very important. I don't think that they've gotten away from those. I just think that all of a sudden that they're recognizing that the challenges that we had as businesses before COVID-19, having employees, concerns over government regulation, those don't go away. Those don't go away at all. There's no way that COVID-19 makes those no longer a concern. I think in some ways, they're probably even more of a concern. But now they're looking more globally as businesses. And they're saying, hey, look, if the economy doesn't provide a fertile environment for me to be able to operate my restaurant, my doctor's office, my lawyer's office, my engineering firm, my public relations firm, whatever that might be, if I can't have a market that even allows me to do my business, I'm in trouble. Now, they don't believe that's going to continue, but that's what I'm talking about early on, about the pensive nature of businesses today, in that they recognize that economy, that recovery is a little bit uncertain. They're optimistic, but it's a little bit uncertain. And so I really think 2021, what they're telling us is that 2021 has to be a year of transition. It has to be a year where we are no longer measuring the pace of the decline, but rather we are measuring the pace of the recovery. And I think you and I would suggest that that's exactly what we're doing as we sit here today, but they need that to continue. They need that vaccine to be effective. They need the closure orders to continue to be lessened and lessened and lessened to where they don't exist anymore. We need to be operating in a state that isn't an emergency, where there can be a normal, respecting the fact that normal may be a little bit different.
When you look at their concern about the economy, you see that over half of small businesses that we surveyed saw a revenue decline in 2020, and a lot of those were significant declines. I know that firsthand from some of the small businesses we work with. And one of the questions I get asked a lot is, when's it coming back? And I know that's a hard question to answer, but if there's anybody who can give a good answer to that, it's probably you, Jeremy. So what are your thoughts on when those revenues come back?
Look, I'll try. And Terry, if I can just add one thing as we're sort of having the conversation, I read that same statistic and it jumped off the page to me as well, right? How affected our businesses were. But I was also found it compelling. How many of them weathered the storm? How many of them saw revenues, they were flat, they weren't necessarily bad? How many of them kept those employees on? How many of them were able to take advantage of something like the Paycheck Protection Program and keep people employed? Now, the second part of your question was really about the recovery. And early on, you and I have a lot of conversations, but we had conversation early on about the fact that we thought it was going to be about an 18 to 36 month recovery cycle. And that was back last summer. I feel like we're probably pretty close to that. I'm real optimistic about us moving into the summer period. A lot of pent up demand, a lot of pent up capital. And I think that that's good. When we ask those small businesses, because I will tell you, I will default to their judgment relative to that. They're really looking at about 1.8 years on average until they kind of they say the economy is back to normal. Now, I think that's a critical kind of element to it overall. And let me make a couple of points relative to that. Number one, when they're asked about the United States economy, they actually expect the United States economy to take longer to recover than the state of Nevada's economy, which I thought was particularly interesting overall. Again, this idea that the Nevada economy is both resilient and resourceful. It has the ability to kind of constantly bounce back. I think that's critical. And when we ask them the question about, do you expect revenues to improve over the next 12 months, that same share that said, hey, things have been really tough, almost uniformly, and maybe even a little bit more, said they do expect things to get better over the next 12-month period. We combine all of that. What does it tell us? It tells us, number one, that there is no question that small businesses, and I think all the rest of us, expect the economy to recover. That, I think, is most critical, because there's a lot of folks out there that wanted to say, hey, Nevada's economy was just going to fold. It was over. The last person to leave, please leave your light, turn the lights off, kind of an attitude. That's not what happened at all. As a matter of fact, our population continued to grow. Our businesses, they bucked up where they needed to. They doubled down on finding ways to be creative and figure out how to get to the other side of this pandemic. You combine that with a little bit of additional stimulus, a little bit of pent-up demand, and a lot of optimism, I like our chances for making that time horizon or beating it as we go into to 2021 and probably into a little bit of 2022.
I do too, Jeremy. It would be interesting if we waited 2 months to take the survey, because we're seeing a great increase in optimism amongst our clients, particularly in the small business space. We benefited tremendously from migration from California, and I just know personally, as I look at 2021, I'm very optimistic for the second half of the year. Just thinking about the metrics of the strip coming back, combined with the strength that we already have, that I think surprised all of us, that we'd be in this situation where home prices continue to rise. We have low inventories. We've got a lot of good companies moving to town. So I think there is some room for optimism right now. Speaking of optimism, there is a percent of small businesses who actually saw revenues increase. And I know we don't have all the details on who those businesses are, but I wonder if you have any thoughts around what lessons we could potentially learn from that as we look to diversify our economy and have one that's better positioned for events like this.
That's a really good question. And as we think about those businesses that sort of maybe weathered the pandemic better than others, I mean, obviously we had a lot of businesses that were in that construction and development sector, obviously viewed as essential. We had a lot of construction, billions of dollars of construction that went on during that period. And so that sort of helped them. I was surprised with how many of the small business respondents found a way to stay open. Roughly 3 out of every 4 found a way to stay open during the pandemic, whether that meant working from home or staying open because they were an essential business, that kind of a thing. But the creativity that people had, particularly when you look at restaurants and grocery stores and people that were providing services to other folks. I mean, look, they got really creative in terms of how they were going to keep those doors open and keep their employees working. Overall, which I think is absolutely, fantastic when we look through all of this. As we start to look forward and we start to think about those lessons that we might take away from it, and I don't want to leave anybody with the impression that there's any silver lining to a pandemic. There's not. This has been miserable for people. We've lost friends and family members. We've seen people get sick. We've seen businesses close down. All of those type of things. But what can we sort of take away from it? Number one, I think, is our resolve. I think that we always need to do that. The way that this community came together, and I'm talking not about just individuals, but also businesses. The way that they kind of came together to help one another. Look, I realize this isn't a commercial for Nevada State Bank, but I have to tell you, the way that Nevada State Bank rallied its team around that Paycheck Protection Program and really punched above its weight in terms of getting those out, I can tell you it helped a number of businesses, including my own. And so I'm incredibly grateful for that. And when we look at all of the businesses that reported in this year, their ability to keep people working as a result of access to that program, I think that is something that this community and frankly, your institution should be very proud of. Beyond that, you ask a broader question about economic development and economic diversification. Look, we went from an unemployment rate of about 3.5% to an unemployment rate in excess of 30% in Southern Nevada alone. Right now, we've dropped dramatically. We've added a lot of jobs back. That's a real positive there. But why did Southern Nevada's unemployment rate jump so high? It's because we are so incredibly dependent on people's decisions to get in a car, get on a plane, and come to Las Vegas. We know that. We have got to find ways to diversify our economy. And that doesn't mean that you abandon the hospitality industry that's been so incredibly successful. We need to make our hospitality industry the most successful hospitality industry anywhere on planet Earth. But we have to find multiple specializations. And I think we need to also look at the lessons learned in Northern Nevada. I know a lot of people in Northern Nevada are concerned about the growth. You mentioned housing prices going up, streets being more crowded, schools being more crowded. And they like to point to companies like Tesla opening up and saying, oh, look, this is what's causing the problem. There is no doubt that growth is adding to that problem, but it is not the problem in and of itself. What they've been able to do is diversify the economy, stabilized it, kept the unemployment rate half of what it was in the southern portion of the state. Really productive overall. And I think those lessons are ones we are either going to learn from, or you and I are going to be having the same conversation the next time we have some type of crazy interruption to our economy again.
Yeah, I agree, Jeremy. And seeing some of the businesses that have relocated from California that, frankly, again, it's hard to find silver linings and maybe even inappropriate to use that phrase, but we have attracted some businesses that are diversifying our economy right now. And that's very encouraging, very encouraging. Let's talk about something a little less encouraging. and maybe a little politics without getting political. So we do see in the results that small businesses are more pessimistic about the recent election results than we've typically seen. What are your takeaways from that?
Well, look, I mean, there's no doubt that the change in the prior administration was very pro-business, very pro-small business, those type of things. And I think there's what we're seeing right now is a degree of uncertainty, Terry. I think that a lot of what we're seeing in January of 2021 is they don't know exactly what a Biden administration or this new Congress is going to mean for us as a nation. I think the other side is that business owners are pretty pragmatic, right? They understand that it is a lot easier to spend money you don't have than it is to pay back money you don't have. It's a phrase that I love to talk about, but in terms of the stimulus, somebody's going to have to pay it back. And I think a lot of those business owners and operators are really concerned about the headwind that could potentially be created by that. There's a lot of uncertainty created in terms of, okay, we got this far. Now, where do we go here? But if I can just touch back on something that you said a moment ago about the number of businesses that are moving from California, the number of people that are moving from California, I think that same sentiment that people have had relative to being concerned about government and intervention and regulation and all of those type of things is the same thing that is driving businesses into the state of Nevada that we're seeing today. There are concerns in other states, not just California, but California being an obvious one because of its size and proximity, that are essentially have real concerns relative to that operating environment and what it's going to mean for them as a business. And so they are looking for other places to go. And Nevada is on the top of the list for many businesses. Like, as you said, this bodes incredibly well for us overall. But if we're going to learn anything from this year's survey, I would hope that some of our state legislators take a look at the results of the survey, understand where those concerns are coming from, understand that these are the people that are employing all of the folks that have jobs in our state today. And they're saying, hey, look, make sure that you're mindful about the environment that allows us to be a successful business. And I think from that perspective, the small businesses that responded to this year's survey, when they brought up that pessimism relative to that election, I think they were sending us a very unambiguous signal about the fact that the business environment matters here in Nevada. It is the reason that many of them stay here. It is the reason many of them chose here. And we need to be mindful of that as a state.
No, I completely agree, Jeremy. So I think this ties in closely to economic development and diversification. It's a very consistent theme through every one of the surveys we've conducted over the years has been hiring and attracting qualified employees. And frankly, this is one of the things that surprised me in this year's survey, that this was still one of the top concerns of small business, that they struggle to find qualified employees in our market. And that's incredibly important to our economic growth as we move forward solving that issue. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
This is a theme that we brought up early on in our conversation about the fact that while the pandemic made us change our focus, it doesn't change the challenges that we have in our community. It doesn't change the depth of our workforce. Now, I think what is most compelling, and let's be clear, it wasn't just a concern, it was the number one sort of concern that folks told us. And that is, like you said, has been very consistent over the years. The quality and retaining quality employees, finding quality employees is difficult. And I think it's just difficult for businesses still today. I think what is most concerning to me about that particular statistic is here in the state of Nevada, we have 190,000 people that are actively looking for work. Obviously, unemployment still remains high as you and I sit here and talk today. That's a real problem for us. Underemployment, unemployment, still a big challenge. And yet the alignment between the jobs that are open and the people that are looking for the jobs is missing each other, right? We've got a skills gap here in our community. And I think that's what the business is telling us. Businesses are telling us. I think that they've been telling us for a very long time. We've got to do a better job with our public education system. I think they've been underscoring that. I think they've been making it clear that we've got to do a better job in terms of the graduates from whether it's our community colleges, our state colleges, or our universities have got to be more prepared to come in and be workforce ready. Right? And that we cannot just rely on people moving here from wherever and bringing that skill set with them. And so, look, again, The pandemic does not resolve this challenge for us. And if that doesn't shine a very bright light on what are some of the things that we need to focus on from a community development standpoint, as well as an economic development standpoint, I don't know what else will.
Let's talk just a little macroeconomic here for a second. You brought up spending money we don't have, which I think is in the back of all of our minds right now. We enjoy the stimulus. We know it's critical at this time, but there will be consequences down the road in some form, and many expect that in higher interest rates. A lot of small businesses are thinking interest rates could rise as early as this year. What are your takeaways on that?
Yeah, look, I do believe, Terry, that interest rates are going to go up by the end of the year, particularly if the economy bounces back relatively rapidly. And so, look, but let's be clear, interest rates are at ridiculously low levels, and they've been ticking up for about 30 days now, a little bit here or there, but they are at ridiculously low levels. But for where we were a month or two ago, they're at historic levels, lower than we've ever seen, at least in your and my lifetimes, in terms of those low interest rates. So, do they have room to come up? Yeah, they do. But those low interest rates are creating opportunities for people to buy houses at lower cost, for businesses to maybe purchase equipment or to do some type of development activity. And I think we have to be mindful of the fact that the other piece of those low interest rates means that our government is actually paying less on the debts that it's taking out as well. At some point, that's going to come to an end. And I do think we're going to start seeing a ratcheting up of those interest rates at the end of this year. And I think that's going to mean a little bit of a headwind in terms of recovery. The other piece, of course, is inflation. Terry, we have to be concerned about inflation, right? We think about it in terms of other, perhaps less developed countries than our own, right? They print a lot of money. Then you have all this money chasing a finite amount of goods. Now, that doesn't happen as acutely in the United States. At least it hasn't recently. Hasn't been a sort of an acute problem for us because of the nature of our economy and really the strength of the United States dollar. And I think those will continue to be good. But whether it's inflation or some other factor, at some point we're going to have to pay it back, right? And you're just not going to generate $5 trillion worth of stimulus and not have some type of economic ramifications other than just increasing economic activity. And as we get to the end of this year, I think the Federal Reserve is going to have some really hard decisions to make. But I think that those decisions are going to have to be to increase those interest rates because, look, we're already seeing, as you mentioned, a picking up, an increase in momentum for us overall in terms of that economy. And I think the folks at the Fed are keeping a very, very close eye on that. I think they're mindful of the amount of stimulus that's in the economy. And I think they are very, very mindful of the risk. The only thing I'd want to add, not to be overly long-winded here, but the only thing that I want to add is that we are so much better now in monitoring our economy than we were during, 20, 30, 40 years ago. We have so much information that comes in almost real time. The Federal Reserve Bank's ability to essentially manage and monitor the economy is better than it has ever been before. And I think that is something that's going to serve us very well as we sort of dig our way out of this enormous debt we've put ourselves in, which probably was necessary as a result of COVID-19.
So Jeremy, small businesses and large businesses alike had to make a lot of investments into their operations for health and safety concerns in 2020. How are they thinking about that right now?
Well, look, I think when we think about public health and safety and we look at what those businesses are saying around that, I think there's really two things that popped out at me in particular. Number one, they're concerned, they're mindful about public safety and on their premises and for their employees and for their patrons, but they're not scared of it. They're not scared of COVID-19. They feel like they're on top of it. They're ready to be open. They feel like they've made the necessary adaptations. They feel like they can keep their patrons safe. They feel like they can keep their employees safe and that they can operate. And look, we're going to be dealing with the residual effects of COVID-19 for some time to come. The fact that businesses feel like they're completely on top of this and they feel like they're comfortable being able to operate in this environment, I think is outstanding and extremely helpful for us as we think about that pathway to recovery in 2021.
Okay. So Jeremy, any final thoughts? There is a lot of great data in this survey. We've touched on some of it, but would love to hear any final thoughts you have.
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't know that I have a whole lot of things that we haven't touched on, Terry. I think, I feel very grateful right now. I feel grateful for all those businesses and their ability to kind of weather that storm. I know how difficult it's been for so many of them. I'm grateful to Nevada State Bank for going through this exercise. We talked in sort of in the middle of our conversation a little bit about, I think you made the statement about, man, I kind of wish we would have done this survey a couple of months later because we would have sort of captured this optimism. And you're absolutely right. But if I can just play devil's advocate for 1 second, I think that there's something special about when this survey was done. I think that the fact that it was done in January, when businesses were still struggling tremendously and uncertainty still existed relative to this pandemic, and we were still really in the middle of it. We didn't know how the vaccine was going to sort of roll out. We were all concerned about that, right? We are going to have a point in time where we'll be able to measure what business sentiment and be able to see how businesses were feeling and how difficult it really was on them over this past year. And I'm really hopeful that as we look 1 year from now, that optimism that those businesses express to us in terms of what the next 12 months are going to look like are going to show a tremendous increase from this year's survey to what they say 12 months from now, that they actually realize those gains that they're hoping to have. And frankly, but for doing this survey when it was done, I don't think we would have had that.
No, I agree, Jeremy. And I also agree with your comments about small businesses in general in this state and how they weathered the storm. Had the opportunity to work closely with a lot of them, particularly early on in the pandemic when they're all facing just an incredible uncertainty. I mean, we're looking in the rearview mirror now, and now we realize the impact of stimulus. We've seen businesses reopen and capacities increase. But you go back a year ago in March, we had no idea what was in front of us. None of us did. And just a lot of appreciation for those small business people who frankly fought like hell to keep their business open, keep their people employed, and really position us to where we can have some optimism going forward.
Very well said.
Yeah, one of the things I really miss since the pandemic started was actually being in the room with you. Typically, we're making this presentation in a hotel ballroom somewhere with a large crowd, and we're handing out paper copies of our small business survey. I miss that face-to-face interaction with people in our community. But I think some good things have come out of it. We're going to be delivering the survey this year entirely electronically. It's going to live on our website. A lot more people are going to have access to it now. I think you look at the format of this, we're going to be many more people are going to be able to actually hear your insights on the survey than typically would. And I think we've all just adapted to this new environment. How do you think this is going to move forward? Is this going to stick, that these changes in the way we do business?
Yeah, look, I think it's a great question. I mean, everyone's talking about the fact that all these changes, I mean, how many Zoom meetings have we all been on, and, those type of things, and how many folks are working remotely and are going to want to continue to work remotely. Look, when we asked small businesses about all of that, I think what they told us is that, yeah, I think the word that you used is exactly right. They've adapted. And yeah, some employees are probably going to be working remotely more than they did before. As a matter of fact, small businesses told us exactly that they have more folks working remotely, and they're likely to continue to have more folks working remotely. But you know what they also said? That they, like you, are looking forward to getting back to normal, because so many folks do things like are sales related, right? And we ask ourselves, how many new people have we really met over the past 12 months? And that, it's difficult for us socially. I like hanging out with you too, but the challenge is, from a business standpoint, it can be very, very difficult, right? And in my 20 years of doing what I do, one thing that I've learned is that tomorrow has a tendency to look a lot like yesterday. And we're going to learn from this, and we're going to take the things that worked from it, and we're going to leave the rest of it behind. We're going to figure that out. But I think that adaptation is going to carry forward with us. When you talk about the fact that this is the first time we're not going to print the survey, we're going to do it all online. But I think the businesses told us something else along those lines as well. When we ask them how they go to get information, where they go, right? What we're seeing is the internet and social media so much more prevalent than what we saw before. Now, you and I saw those trends starting to develop over the past 4 or 5 years, maybe even longer than that. We really started to develop, but there's no doubt that in this year's survey it took hold. And this may be an important point that we've seen. What the pandemic did is sort of push the fast forward button on some of these things. It caused us to get more comfortable with Zoom. I wasn't terribly comfortable with it a year ago. Look at how great it is now. I mean, you and I this is almost feels right. It almost feels comfortable. Not 100%, but enough that you and I can make it work, right? And we're figuring out how to do things. And that means that businesses that had to be more virtual figured out how to be more virtual. And I think that's going to ultimately be additive for them. They will take the things that work, they will leave the rest, and we will progress. And we may actually be stronger on the way back out.
We're happy to share the survey results with you in great detail. You can find those at nevadasmallbusiness.com, along with a lot of other great resources produced by Jeremy and his team, including our monthly economic update. And I'd also encourage you, we talked a lot about PPP today. And if for those who may not yet have applied for a PPP loan and you experienced some challenges in 2020 due to the pandemic, I encourage you to explore that. We understand that the program has likely been extended through the end of May, and there's still time to apply. There's still dollars left. And certainly Nevada State Bank would love to help you with that. If you go to nsbank.com/cares, you'll be able to access our application. And finally, to learn more about Nevada State Bank, just go to nsbank.com/business. You'll find a lot of resources there, as well as a lot of information on what we offer. So thank you again all for being here today. Really appreciate your time. And for you small business owners out there, really appreciate all that you did in 2020.